Welcome to News Now. I'm your host, Taylor Inman. We're going over the week's biggest headlines for Northwest Montana. Flathead County health officials and experts are preparing for measles as an outbreak spreads in Texas and cases of the virus pop up across the United States. Logan Health pediatrician Dr. Ken Graham said, quote, "If you are unvaccinated and you live in the Flathead, our herd in the Flathead is not immune," end quote. For measles, herd immunity is reached when roughly 94% of people are protected against the virus. About 86% of Montana's 2-year-olds have at least one dose of the MMR vaccine, which covers measles, mumps, and rubella, according to the State Department of Public Health and Human Services. That is slightly lower than the national average of 90%, but the level of protection in Flathead County is unknown. That's because counties are no longer required to report vaccination rates after the passing of House Bill 334 in 2021. While county data is unavailable, Graham suggested that since the onset of COVID-19, vaccination rates have dropped across the board. Mistrust of vaccinations grew during the pandemic. On a national scale, vaccination coverage amongst kindergartners has decreased from around 95.2% during the 2019 to 2020 school year to 92.7% in the 2023-2024 school year, leaving approximately 280,000 kindergartners at risk during that school year, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. A longtime opponent of vaccines, U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert F. Kennedy Jr. suggested Americans consider the measles vaccine after the outbreak in Texas turned deadly in recent weeks. Aside from the Texas outbreak, measles cases have popped up in 9 states: Alaska, California, Georgia, Kentucky, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, and Rhode Island. Back in the Flathead Valley, health experts like Graham have sought to assure people of the vaccine safety. He said, quote, "There's so much misinformation right now, but what we do know is that this vaccine is entirely safe. It does not cause autism," end quote. Graham said that vaccination rates are somewhat lower in rural communities such as Northwest Montana. County officials said they would follow a standardized protocol to respond to an outbreak and adjust to circumstances on the ground. Lisa Dennison, Population Health Manager for Flathead County, said they used the protocol as a guide, but their specific response will be altered slightly to best address an outbreak based on what disease is involved and other contributing factors. Graham said the best thing you can do if you suspect you have measles is to quarantine and contact a physician. Measles is most notably a childhood respiratory infection that spreads easily and proves fatal. Symptoms include a high fever, cough, red watery eyes, and a spreading rash. While death rates have been falling worldwide as more children receive the measles vaccine, the virus still kills more than 200,000 people a year, according to the Mayo Clinic. As a result of high vaccination rates in the past, measles hasn't been widespread in the U.S. in about 2 decades. Most outbreaks occurring now are in people who are unvaccinated. State legislators have stripped funds from 5 local arts nonprofits, accusing the organizations of showing disrespect for the legislative process by not attending committee hearings. A February 17th amendment to House Bill 9 removed or reduced state grant funding for 22 arts programs, including 5 Flathead Valley organizations. The organizations were originally slated to receive between $12,500 and $13,500 each from a long-standing arts grant funded through the state's Coal Trust. Representative John Fitzpatrick, a Republican from Anaconda, introduced the amendment to penalize organizations that had not provided in-person or Zoom testimony at prior hearings regarding the bill. Fitzpatrick said of the absent organizations that, quote, "It may be laziness, it could be a sense of entitlement, it could be fiscal incompetence or failure to accept personal responsibility," end quote. But Jen Acebrook, executive director of Whitefish Community Theater, said the faux pas was a result of miscommunication, not incompetence. She said she thinks there was a grave misunderstanding of what was required of the organization, adding that, quote, "I feel bad we misunderstood this, but we can't follow rules we don't understand." The Montana Arts Council is responsible for reviewing and managing applications for the state's cultural and aesthetic grants. While Acebrook received an email from the council regarding dates to provide testimony for the Long Range Planning Committee, communications never implied that testimony would factor into funding decisions. An attachment to the December 19th email read, "You are not required to testify, but the committee chair strongly encourages everyone to participate." Acebrook promptly replied to the email, informing council she would be unavailable on the scheduled dates, asking if she could provide written testimony instead. A Montana Arts Council employee confirmed that written testimony works great, so Acebrook was shocked when the Whitefish Theater Company had its proposed reward reduced from $12,500 to $2,000. North Valley Music School and Whitefish Review also had their grant awards reduced to $2,000 after providing written testimony rather than appearing in person or via Zoom. North Valley Music School Executive Director Deidre Corson said in previous years the school had not been penalized for testifying. She said in her 13 years of being involved with the school that it was the first time she'd seen anything like this. During a February 21st hearing, Carolyn Valicic said the Glacier Symphony's recent change in leadership contributed to the organization's decision against attending legislative hearings. Alpine Theater Project Executive Director Cynthia Benkelman said that she did attend a hearing, but the committee ran out of time before she could testify. The current amendment fully retracts both organizations' proposed awards. Fitzpatrick admitted during the February 21st hearing that there is no requirement for anyone to come before an appropriations committee and testify on behalf of the funding they hope to receive. But he maintained his assertion that the amendment was inappropriate messages to nonprofits he characterized as slackers. Another nonprofit executive, who asked that their name and affiliation not appear out of fear of jeopardizing their own organization's funding, said Fitzpatrick's statements spread misinformation about the funding process. While the executive did testify before the committee, they had not interpreted their attendance as a requirement for funding and disputed Fitzpatrick's claims that the grant funds were a give-me check for arts organizations. The executive said it is a rigorous process to apply for these grants. At a February 21st hearing, a representative from the Montana Arts Council apologized to the organization for the initial miscommunication and acknowledged that she misinterpreted the committee's expectations for applicants. The council has reportedly suggested that impacted nonprofits also adopt an apologetic tone when communicating about the proposed funding cuts. The amendment will face votes in both the House Appropriations Committee and the Senate Finance Committee before the cuts are finalized. Kalispell City Council is expected to vote on an agreement struck between City Hall and the Flathead Warming Center at its March 17th meeting. City Manager Doug Russell said the vote is anticipated to be in 2 weeks as long as all the necessary legal documents are processed before then. A deal with the overnight homeless shelter was reached in the late evening of February 25th after a 13-hour mediation session that Mayor Mark Johnson said included himself and counselors Chad Graham and Sid Dowd. Johnson declined to further comment on the agreement until after the council vote. Johnson said he won't be in attendance during the meeting as he will be traveling out of town. The Warming Center's permit was rescinded in a 6-3 vote last fall over neighborhood complaints of criminal activity along the North Meridian Road corridor. Counselors argued that the low-barrier shelter had failed to be a good neighbor and reneged on promises made in its permit application years earlier. The Warming Center subsequently filed a suit in federal court, which led to the mediation. If the agreement is approved by council, the shelter's conditional use permit would be permanently reinstated, and the city would have to publicly apologize to shelter director Tanya Horn for falsely accusing her of lying during the permit application process. The effort to shut down the shelter will also cost the city $140,000 in legal fees to the Institute for Justice, a national nonprofit legal firm representing the Warming Center in the lawsuit against the city. Russell will also become the point person for the Warming Center and the public on any homelessness issues in Kalispell under the terms of agreement. As for the Warming Center, it must undertake routine cleanup patrols within a quarter mile of the shelter, look for ways to fund transportation in and out of the neighborhood, open different lines of communications with neighbors, and hold quarterly board meetings that will be open to the public. If the council does not ratify the agreement, the lawsuit will proceed to trial in March of 2026, according to the Institute for Justice. Thanks for joining us. News Now is a podcast from the Daily Interlake. We're proud to be the largest independent newsroom in Montana and the longest continuously published newspaper in the region. Today's stories were written by Daily Interlake reporters Kate Heston, Jack Underhill, and Haley Smalley. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel to never miss an episode of the pod. Everybody stay safe and have a great week. Thanks to our sponsor, Lauren's Auto Repair at 1309 US Highway 2 in Kalispell. Most consistently rated 5-star shop serving the Kalispell area. Visit laurensauto.com.
Will take care of you. The highest rated in the Kalispell